The Jehovah's Witnesses have what can only be described as an extremely messed up organization. Actually, that's not true. I could describe them in a lot of other ways, just also negative. They are a cult, make no doubt about it, and they are a cult that, like many cults, abuses its members. And this isn't even a matter of like atheist versus Christianity, though they are a Christian cult. Whoever you are, you should be offended by the way this cult runs. Though it's worth noting that myself, as I was growing up as a Mormon, I know, news to you, I never mention it. But yeah, as I was growing up as a Mormon, we were often taught tolerance, especially of other very fundamentalist religions, other cults, and the Jehovah's Witnesses were one of them. Somehow, the amount of abuse there doesn't offend most people who are Mormon, or at least the church as a whole. It's kind of like one of those social contracts, like, hey, if we don't point out their abuse, maybe no one will point out ours. Anyway, I have what I think is a complete treat in store for you today. I am still quite sick. I'm doing my best not to show it when I'm on air. And today, my friend Owen Morgan, otherwise known as Telltale, is going to share with you how he escaped from the Jehovah's Witness cult. This is a really incredible story. Once you're done, there are links down below so you can go find his channel. Make sure you hit subscribe there, and you know what? Make sure you hit subscribe here too. Otherwise, I'm Mr. Atheist, he's Telltale. Let's do this.
Mr. Atheist told me to come on his channel and tell my story of coming out of Jehovah's Witnesses. I've known Mr. Atheist since before he blew up, and now I'd call him one of my best friends, so thanks for having me on to talk about it, Jimmy. Let's get into it. I was born into a Jehovah's Witness home. My parents joined in the 70s. For those of you who might be from Jehovah's Witnesses, you'll know that the 1970s wasn't a great time for that religion. They made this end times prediction for 1975 that unsurprisingly fell flat, and when it did, they reversed course and tried to cover it up. Fairly successfully. They lost lots of people over it, but newcomers were kind of unaware of it. At this point, when my parents joined in the late 70s, they already had 2 kids, my brother and my sister. They were very young. Eventually, they had my other brother in the early 80s, and finally, I was born in 1989. So by the time I came along, they were well established in the religion. But my dad was kind of forced into the situation. He didn't really want to join. He wasn't a great dude. He was an alcoholic and physically abusive to my mom, my sister, and my older brother for their entire lives. So before my mom started studying with Jehovah's Witnesses, she actually divorced him. She started studying while they were divorced. And this next part came straight from my mom, so I know it's true. She told my dad that if he started studying and became a Jehovah's Witness with her, she would remarry him. If he didn't study and become a Jehovah's Witness, he'd never see the kids again. He felt backed into a corner, so he started studying. When I was 8, my dad got in a car accident, and he couldn't really work for the computer repair shop he owned anymore. It started to tank. So my family moved from Connecticut to West Virginia around that time, because cost of living was lower and all that. While this was happening, my sister had found a new husband. She was 18. That's marriage age for Jehovah's Witnesses. There's no sex before marriage, and there's definitely no touching yourself. So every 18-year-old looks for a husband or wife the moment they're old enough. Notice I said husband or wife. They have some very ass-backwards views on gender and sex. Anyways, when we moved to West Virginia, my sister moved to Texas to be with her new husband, and not long after that, my older brother found a girlfriend of his own. She wasn't a Jehovah's Witness, and of course that's super against the rules, so he was disfellowshipped for it. Now, I understand Jimmy came from Mormonism, but in Jehovah's Witnesses, disfellowshipping is probably closer to Mormons' excommunication than disfellowshipping. They forbid you from being friends with outsiders. The only friends you can have are people inside the religion. Now, there are some exceptions for this, but that was my experience growing up as a Jehovah's Witness. No outside friends, no going to birthday parties, no nothing. That means when they start shunning you for not believing it anymore, they take everything. I mean everything. And that's what happened to my brother. Of course, being a believing Jehovah's Witness at the time, around 10 years old or so at this point, I took part in that shunning too. I didn't really have a choice, but I believed it was the right thing anyways, even if I had. Some time passes and my last brother turned 18. I was 12 at this point. Of course, having turned 18, he found a wife too. He got married to her and moved off to Atlanta, Georgia. And that's when I realized why everybody was leaving this state. Without my siblings around to protect me, I became the target of my mom's indoctrination and my dad's abusive behavior. It wasn't long before he paddled my ass so hard that I literally could not sit down. I had bruises. So they didn't send me to school that day. And from that moment on, they decided to homeschool me. My mom was working, and my dad was on OxyContin for his back pain from the car accident. So my mom was gone, and my dad was asleep most of the time. I spent the next 3 or 4 years in de facto solitary confinement. I didn't have any friends because there was nobody in the congregation my age. There were a couple people, but they didn't really like me anyways. And I couldn't make friends outside the religion. Even if I wanted to, who would I befriend? I never went anywhere. I was completely alone for the entirety of those 4 years. And to make matters worse, both my parents have bipolar disorder. So the only human interaction I ever had was with bipolar people. But the majority of the time, I was just alone. I remember finding live news broadcasts on TV because I knew somewhere in the world that exact thing was happening as I was watching it happen. It was a connection to the outside world that I didn't and I couldn't have otherwise. I'm lucky enough to have come out of it without any kind of mental or emotional conditions outside of depression, but my personality was formed by only ever interacting with 2 bipolar people for 4 years, during very formative years of my life. As a result, I just don't know how to interact with people. I've been struggling and fighting to learn how proper social interactions work, but it's an uphill battle, and it has been since I got out of that situation. It probably always will be. And unfortunately, my dad continued to be physically abusive through it all. My mom would play the violin after he'd go on a rampage, and to this day, when I close my eyes while I hear a violin played softly, I can see shelves being pulled down and blood everywhere and phone cords being ripped out of walls. Kind of a strange and specific imagery, but it's there. I still remember trying to push a shelf in front of my door and sitting in front of it while my dad tried to bust the door in to get to me. Anyways, at 16, I ended up going back to high school. So I left school in 7th grade, homeschooled for 4 years, and did absolutely nothing that entire time. Didn't do any schoolwork. But my older brother saw what was happening and was loosely linked with the family still, even being disfellowshipped. So he pushed my parents to send me back to high school. They tested me to see where I should go, since I hadn't had any kind of education since 7th grade. And the test said I should go to 10th. But I still had to take 9th grade classes because I needed the credits to graduate. Unfortunately, everybody I went to school with before was in 11th, so I was kind of primed to fail socially. But this is where things actually started to look up. I was basically an adult at this point. I was 16. I could form my own friendships. I started hanging out with a girl named Katie, and as time passed, we became better and better friends. The abuse from my dad was severe enough that people could clearly see what was happening. CPS would get called, my mom would take me and move out. Then the elders in the congregation would tell her she had to move back in with him because they're married. So she would, and it would repeat. And finally, my dad did it one last time. The CPS worker showed up again and told my mom, if you don't move out with him and stay gone, we're putting him in foster care. So she did. It was de facto court-ordered at this point. The state was involved, and it was out of the hands of Jehovah's Witnesses. We moved out together for the final time, but before we left, my dad, who's ostensibly been wheelchair-bound for the past 11 years or so, stood up, walked into the living room, and said, I've been lying to you guys and myself for 11 years. I can actually walk. Of course, I knew that. He seemed to do a fine job walking when he was trying to bust my door in and throw me against a wall. It was a manifestation of his Munchausen syndrome. At any rate, we moved out together and moved into Section 8 housing. I got a girlfriend around this time too. She was loosely linked with a neighboring congregation. Her grandfather went to the meetings and both her parents were baptized, but they were inactive. They still believed it, but they didn't raise her as a Jehovah's Witness. Whatever, it was good enough for me. We started going out, but she still kind of had the Jehovah's Witness mindset of no sex before marriage, so the most we really did was kiss. But there were some Jehovah's Witness kids from my Kingdom Hall who were watching me and reporting everything I did back to the elders. Eventually, the elders approached me and told me they knew what I was doing. That is to say, dating a worldly girl. I'd gone to a high school party and smoked a cigarette and drank a little alcohol. I was trying to get the social interaction that I didn't have throughout my teen years. So I told them everything, and they scheduled what they call a judicial hearing for me, where they decide if they're going to shun you or not. My mom didn't wait for the judicial committee. She just kicked my ass out on the street at 18 years old. I was still in 11th grade. I had a part-time job at Burger King, and I had nowhere to go. So I called up the girl I knew from high school, Katie, and asked her if I could come over. I crawled in her bedroom window at her grandparents' house and lived in her bedroom for 3 weeks because I had nowhere else to go. People don't really realize how complicated it is to hide a person in your bedroom for that length of time. I had to plan when I would use the bathroom. She would bring her food back to her bedroom so I could eat too. I would sneak out the window again to go to work every day. Eventually, a friend I worked with told me he had a bedroom I could stay in for $150 a month. Katie and I moved in there together. We both worked at Burger King now, full-time, which meant I had to drop out of high school. I couldn't go to school and work full-time. Eventually, Katie and I got married and had a kid together. I got married at 18, like a good Jehovah's Witness, and I had a kid 9 months later, to the day. In retrospect, I probably could have made some better decisions, but I had no idea what I was doing. I had no guidance, and I was missing 4 years of life experience from being isolated that entire time. I still believed Jehovah's Witnesses at this point. I still thought it was all true. I felt like the shunning I was experiencing was right. I felt like I deserved it. It wasn't until years later, at about 21 years old, I was talking to my sister's husband at the time. He was still an active door-knocking Jehovah's Witness, and I was still disfellowshipped. But he said to me one day, "Dude, you know that the president of Jehovah's Witnesses in the 1930s used donation money to build a mansion and had it deeded to Bible characters like Isaac and Moses and Abraham and shit, and just kept it warm for them until they came back?" I don't know why that was the thing that made me realize how outrageous the religion was, but that's what did it. My entire life, Jehovah's Witnesses had convinced me that every religion out there was false. They were all full of shit. And that moment with my brother-in-law is what it took to realize that Jehovah's Witnesses were full of shit too. That's the moment I became an atheist. From then on, I realized I had to question literally everything. I had to question my views on sexuality. Is being gay actually wrong, or was it programmed into me? Is evolution actually wrong? Was Adam and Eve a real, literal story, or was it all bullshit? People can be abusive. That happens. I can't blame Jehovah's Witnesses for my dad's bad behavior, but I can blame Jehovah's Witnesses for telling my mom she needs to move back in with my dad, even after CPS got involved. I can blame the religion for the complete isolation from society that I experienced. My parents were living like good Jehovah's Witnesses are supposed to, by isolating me from outsiders. And Jehovah's Witnesses aren't the only ones who do that. That's one of the hallmarks of a cult. Discourage outside interaction. Discourage alternative sources of information. Shun you if you disobey or disbelieve. It's all standard stuff. That's why I do what I do. That's why I have my YouTube channel. That's why I'll never stop talking about this stuff, as long as I'm pulling air into my lungs. Because there's somebody out there right now, at this moment, as you're watching this video, who just got kicked out on the fucking street by their parents because they don't believe it anymore. There's somebody out there right now who's watching a live news broadcast because they don't have another connection to the outside world. There's somebody who is sneaking to watch this video right now. As long as I'm breathing, I will always make content for those people, and hopefully it'll be of benefit to somebody. Anyways, that's all I've got for you. If you like the work I do and you want to see me continue to do it, you can check out my YouTube channel, which is just Telltale. And you can check out my Patreon too. That's the best way of supporting me. If you want to get something back for your support, you can check my Teespring or my retro games store. All links can be found at my website, telltaleatheist.com, so give it a look. And again, thanks for having me on, Jimmy. And thanks for watching, guys.
Again, a big thank you to Telltale for helping reduce my workload while I'm trying to get better. Follow the links down below to his channel, watch some of his stuff. I'll include a link actually to a video I did for him in a very similar situation in the past. That's right, there's an episode of my show you might not have ever seen because it's on his channel. So it's really his show, but it's, you know, the same kind of stuff. It's all about the signs that I somehow missed that I was in a cult. Go follow those links, hit subscribe over here, hit subscribe over there. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Dear Mr. Atheist. And as always, we end the show by taking a look at these wonderful people who keep the channel alive and going. A special thank you to my orbital cosmic pumpkin gods: Chris, Commander Bork, Caleb, Thathy Cap, Mabbity Babbity, Ariel, Rachel, Stephen, Kindle, Franz, Zila, Gould to Gaming, Kat, Carolina, Tyler, Hi Sky Daddy, and Ashley. And Ashley, by the way, welcome. I forgot to mention that yesterday. With love, I've been Jimmy Snow. Mr. Atheist was not my father.